Continuing debate, the honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and as always, it's an honour to be able to stand in this place and talk about issues that are so important to Canadians. And I would just note, it's interesting, the previous Liberal Speaker spoke a lot about how his experience of an athlete has informed policy. I wish that they would take that same approach when it comes to some of the expertise offered by, farmers in this place helping inform things like agriculture and environmental policy. Mr. Speaker, before I jump into my speech here, I would just like to note to you and the table that I will be splitting my time with the fantastic member from Hastings, Lennox, and Addington. Mr. Speaker, we rise to address an important issue, safe sport, and the need to ensure that as Canadians, when what really comes down to trust, whether it's a parent dropping their kids off with an athletic organization, whether it's an athlete going on an international trip to compete with the flag on their shoulder, that there is trust within the institutions of sport in this country. And we see how it's been revealed over the last number of years, dating back to 2018 in the specific instances, but I know this has been something that has throughout history. We've seen examples where people have taken advantage of that trust that is given to abuse and hurt athletes. And Mr. Speaker, it is unacceptable. It needs to be stopped, and we cannot overstate how important it is to ensure that we have those very real and honest conversations, because when it comes down to it, Canadians and our country should and can be proud of much that we've accomplished in sport, whether it be the things that make it onto television, or unlike what the previous Liberal Speaker thinks, I'm very proud of a professional and amateur rodeo circuit in this country that is actually a sport that we can be proud of in this country, or whether it be minor sport associations. And I know my kids, I'm very proud of my two boys, first year of baseball this last year, and had a fantastic time in learning some of those key and formational skills of teamwork and the discipline associated with a team sport. And I know each member of this House, I'm sure either directly or just one or two steps removed, would have a story of whether it's themselves or their children or a family member who's been involved in various levels of sport. And we cannot understate how important it is that, like I said before, whether it's dropping off a child, whether it's participation yourself, you need to be able to trust those in authority, especially when it can be in vulnerable situations. You have a power structure that comes along with the way that sports organizations are ran, and we see how there has been abuse that has taken place that is absolutely egregious. And when it comes to the report, that I appreciate my colleague from Quebec moving this concurrence debate today, because it gives us the opportunity to talk about how important it is to not just talk about these issues, but to ensure that there is in fact action, so that both we can, as a nation, whether that's us as parliamentarians looking at national sport organizations and demanding that there's excellence and trust within the structures that exist, or whether it be all the way down to the parents dropping their kids off with those for those minor sports at a young age. There has to be trust throughout that entire process, because, Mr. Speaker, when that trust breaks down, it leads to absolutely tragic situations, and we heard about a number of those scenarios, whether it be in relation to Hockey Canada, I know gymnastics, and the hearings at the Status of Women Committee. There are tragic stories that this Parliament has heard where action should have been taken and it was not. Words were not enough, and the result is lives broken and destroyed. We have to ensure that and because it comes down to the idea of sport is an important one. It's something that is not lost on me. As I mentioned, my kids starting organized sport at a young age, or whether it be the impact that sport has in building a resilient workforce, a capable structure, and of course we saw with the Olympics and the Paralympics this summer, the national pride that can be expressed. I had a number of to reference my personal favorite sport again, rodeo. I had a number of local athletes from Battle River Crowfoot compete in the Canadian Finals Rodeo here just a number of weeks ago, and I'm very proud that a high school friend of mine will be going to the National Finals Rodeo here in a couple of weeks. So we talk about sport and international competitions as being that point of pride that we can show in something. It gives you something to believe in, including when times are tough. And I know I remember in the 2010 Olympics watching it was at a professor's house, the gold medal game. It was an incredible, it was a moment of an intense national pride when Canada scored that winning medal. And so we have to be able to, at the foundational level here, when it comes to the role that the government plays, is to ensure that these national sport organizations and the leadership they provide in sport in this country can be trusted every step of the way. Now, Mr. Speaker, there was, in addition to, and I understand that time is often short, so I did want to highlight there was a number of things that Conservatives who were proud to participate in the report that we are debating concurrence here today. We did put forward, in addition to the work that the committee put into the overall report, there was a number of additional recommendations that were submitted in a dissenting report. And to ensure that we can, like I referenced before, can see that trust be restored. And the first one is I think, at the very foundation of everything we're talking about here, that Sport Canada must hold national sports organizations accountable. There has to be that accountability throughout the entire system, leadership from the top all the way through our sports organizations. And I've heard from constituents, Mr. Speaker, where there have been examples where that has not been the case, and that erosion of trust and the inability for different organizations to have that clear accountability structure that is required to see that in fact happens. Second, Mr. Speaker, in the dissenting report, Conservatives highlighted that the Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner must investigate complaints in a timely and impartial fashion and enforce the consequences for non-compliance. It's great to have, Mr. Speaker, an office with an idea, but I've heard from other members of civil society, those who have been through various ombudsman processes and whatnot, that if there's not teeth associated with an office to ensure that there can be investigations, to ensure that there can be actual resolution to concerns that are brought forward, it may look nice on paper, it may even have a nice office building in a downtown center somewhere. But Mr. Speaker, if that can't actually result in action, then truly one has to ask what the point is. And in terms of ensuring that and again, it comes back to that fundamental concept of trust. You have to be able to trust the process and to be able to investigate in an impartial fashion, to investigate complaints in a timely manner, and to enforce consequences for non-compliance. Mr. Speaker, the third recommendation that the dissenting report put forward was that Sport Canada must work with provincial and territorial governments to ensure provincial and post-secondary sport organizations are held accountable. And Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that sport is not something that starts and ends in the nation's capital. It is something that, and like referenced, I'm sure we all have stories, whether it's our children, whether it's ourselves, whether it's high school sports all the way up to professional athletes. There's those stories where we have to ensure that there is that Team Canada, if you will, approach that goes across governments, across different levels of organizations to ensure that there is that accountability, again, coming to that fundamental principle of trust. And then I would note the fourth recommendation in the dissenting report, Mr. Speaker, is that Sport Canada must establish a public registry. And I want to dive into this just very briefly, Mr. Speaker. This is fundamentally important. As we heard in testimony before the Status of Women Committee, there has to be that ability for athletes, coaches, parents, those involved in organizations to look and know that the person that they are entrusting either their lives or their children's lives with can be trusted. If there are that to ensure that they are going in with eyes wide open, that full accountability and trust that needs to be there. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the government's response, and I found it interesting, the previous speaker talked about how great they've been doing, yet it was that government that oversaw that Sport Canada saw that knew about allegations for 4 years, yet did nothing. That's 4 years, Mr. Speaker. Action needs to be taken, trust needs to be restored, and this debate today is an important step, but without action, it's just words.
Question et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député Abitibi.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you to my colleague for his speech and his sensitivity on such an important subject as this one. He's talked about tangible actions. I'd like to hear what tangible actions he considers and his potential government in waiting considers, because it is highly likely that tangible recommendations will not be implemented by the Liberals but by Conservatives. Is he committing to acting concretely for a public and independent investigation if his party comes to power? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I do appreciate the little bit of a change in attitude that the Bloc is acknowledging that there could be, in fact, a Conservative government at some point in the future. I certainly hope that that is sooner than later. And, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to concrete and tangible actions, that's the foundation of my speech, was to articulate exactly that. It's one thing to talk. It's one thing to have nice press releases and announcements and even training systems and questionnaires that have to be answered. But without the tangible action and then the results that follow that tangible action being quantified and that accountability being enforced, Mr. Speaker, we need to ensure that that happens, especially when it comes to an issue that is as important as ensuring that our kids, our children, our athletes are able to be kept safe in this country. Tangible action absolutely is required. That's why Conservatives put forward a dissenting report, and we'll take that action when we have the opportunity to make the changes that are needed in this country.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe the member. The Conservatives would take action if they were actually in government on this file. Because the first question that the Conservative Party had to ask on this issue was that he would cut Support Canada, get rid of it. And that came as, I shouldn't say as a bit of a surprise, because I'm used to the Conservatives saying, whether it's cutting CBC or, the dental program, you name it, they have those big scissors and they're prepared to do all the cutting that their little hearts desire. But I was surprised to the degree in which the member, his colleague, was so eager to get on the record saying that they're going to cut Sports Canada. And I'm wondering, does he support his colleague's comment when they say he's going to cut the Sports Canada?
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, 4 years under the watch of that government, Sport Canada sat on allegations, serious allegations, and that member and the government that he supports did nothing. Did nothing. So, Mr. Speaker, I find it rich coming from that member that he would suggest tangible action shouldn't be taken, and especially when it was that member on Monday, when a unanimous consent motion was brought forward to this place, he denied it. I think some of his constituents probably have some questions about the politics that he's playing in that regard.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Churchill-Coquitlam-Kaskey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question to my colleague, obviously, much of this morning's discussion has been focused around the need for ethics and fair play in sport, an end to a culture of lack of accountability and the extreme, the full range of cases where the well-being of athletes were ignored time and time again by sports organizations and the federal government. This week in our Heritage Committee, I put forward a motion to seek public accountability for the soccer drone scandal that threw our women's soccer players under the bus and deeply affected Canada's reputation when it comes to soccer and sport on the world stage. I'd like to ask my colleague why he and his colleagues supported this motion, and how troubling it is that the Liberals, along with the Bloc, are seeking to cover up a scandal that rocked our country on the world stage.
With only about 30 seconds remaining, the Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question because being a member of the Heritage Committee and having the honour of being able to fulfill the Shadow Minister role during this time, I was shocked when the Liberals, along with the Bloc Québécois, rejected the motion that member had brought forward when it came to asking for some accountability and answers for a sports scandal that did truly shock the world and put Canada and its athletes at a disadvantage at a point when there should have been a coming together of our nation. It was the leadership and just simply being able to demand answers. Mr. Speaker, I do not understand why those Liberals at every turn, whether it's sports, whether it's corruption, whether it's the fiscal status of the country, their default answer to everything seems to be to bury their heads in the sand and cover it up and hide from Canadians the real answers.